Anthropic's chatbot, named Claude, is now #1 in the App Store after the company's very public fallout with the Pentagon this week. Just yesterday, it passed OpenAI's ChatGPT for the #1 spot in Apple's U.S. App Store. The company, Anthropic, says free users have increased more than 60% since January, and paid subscribers have more than doubled this year. This all comes after Anthropic tried to negotiate for safeguards to stop the Department of Defense from using its AI models for mass surveillance of Americans. It also opposed the Defense Department's plan to use its technology for fully autonomous weapons to power equipment like drones that could kill without any human involvement. Now, because Anthropic wouldn't agree to those two requirements, President Trump then told all federal agencies to stop using Anthropic. To discuss this story, as well as the developing news of the war in the Middle East and Iran, we want to welcome back Nolan Higdon to the show. He's a political history professor at UC Santa Cruz. Good morning, Nolan.
Good morning.
The Anthropic Pentagon dispute, for people who've been following this, it's disturbing, almost dystopian. Is there any recourse for Anthropic or anyone who's concerned about how the federal government uses AI in the future?
Well, this has been a longstanding problem. The United States government has really been hesitant to put any regulations in place on big tech. They mostly let big tech kind of decide for itself. As a result, you see these kinds of conflicts. And I think one of the main issues here, concerns, at least from the perspective of Anthropic, is what we call AI right now is not actually intelligence. It's large language models that memorize patterns. And as a result, there's not a lot of safeguards on what that pattern recognition can do. We've seen certain tests where they've tried to have a large language model do a certain thing, but it does something else instead. And I think Anthropic and these other companies are concerned that their product, if it's deciding things like such as war, could have some outcomes that those using it aren't expecting. And I think that's the concern at the heart of this discussion.
Yeah, it still makes mistakes. AI is not infallible. And also, it takes away that human element when it comes to these matters of life and death. Where do you think this dispute goes? What's the next step from here?
Well, I mean, it looks like OpenAI has decided to step in and fill whatever void the Department of Defense thought it needed filled by Anthropic. But I think there's a larger regulatory question here. AI, like many big tech products, has been advertised really well. People think that, it is infallible when in fact is not, or it can do these things that it cannot do. And it's being integrated across society for things like hiring, college admissions. It's being used in healthcare. And it's not really clear the products can do what they said they can do. And we're seeing a lot of complications and bad outcomes. So I think we desperately need some kind of democratic oversight. And what I mean by that is some sort of regulatory framework where the people are involved in deciding where do we want AI and where do we not want AI. I would think of it as something like what we did with like nuclear weapons, right? We have some regulations on nuclear weapons or nuclear use. We need to think about AI, I think, in that same way.
But that, of course, requires some government and political involvement, and it doesn't look like there's any impetus or drive for that, especially not coming from the White House, but from anyone really in the federal government at this point. Let's switch over to the ongoing conflict that just developed over the weekend in the Middle East and Iran. President Trump had campaigned as a candidate who condemned, quote unquote, forever wars. Will the start of this military excursion in Iran be kind of test the president's base on this?
I think so. I think it already has. The so-called 12-day war back in June of 2025, that was already creating fissures within the MAGA movement because, as you noted, Donald Trump won the nomination for the Republican Party in part because he saw things like the 2003 invasion of Iraq as a mistake, and he had this notion of America first, which meant not getting involved in these type of wars. I think the critical question for the Trump administration now is how much further do they go with regime change? Is this going to be like Venezuela, where sure you take out Maduro, but Maduro's regime remains in power? Or are you going to try and change the entire regime in Iran? If so, that's going to need a lot more U.S. involvement. That could mean troops on the ground. And I think that's going to be a bridge too far for a lot of those America First MAGA supporters.
At the same time, Democrats are in a tough position opposing him and this conflict in Iran because Iran's regime is not a sympathetic actor in any way. Many Iranian Americans here in the U.S. celebrating the Ayatollah's downfall. So how do Democrats manage and reconcile that?
It's going to be a very delicate messaging issue for the Democrats. They're going to have to explain that this is not about any particular leader or person. This is about constitutional safeguards. Congress is the one that's supposed to declare war. The reason being, not just because we may win or lose a war per se, but the repercussions of war go on for decades afterward. And so here in the Iran, the Trump administration, it's not just simply removing a leader. What are we going to do in the days and decades ahead? And Congress needs to be a part of that conversation. That can't be left up to one individual, the President of the United States.
All right. Well, looking forward to speaking more about this topic and others on our streaming show, Take Two. We'll have you back at 10 o'clock. But for now, Professor Nolan Higdon, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
All right.